Satchidananda of the Vedanta is one existence without a second. All that is He. This entire paragraph can be the response to any atheist when they say, if there is a God, why is there sad things and bad things happening? So this should be the answer to them. Such a God is not the Vedantic Satchidananda. Satchidananda of the Vedanta is one existence without a second. All that is He. If then evil and suffering exist, it is He that bears the evil and suffering in the creature in whom He has embodied Himself. The problem then changes entirely. The question is no longer how came God to create for His creatures the suffering and evil of which He is Himself incapable and therefore immune, but how came the soul and infinite existence consciousness bliss to admit into itself that which is not bliss, that which seems to be its positive negation. Half of the moral difficulty, that difficulty in its one unanswerable form, disappears. It no longer arises, can no longer be put. Cruelty to others, I remaining immune or even participating in their sufferings by subsequent repentance or belated pity, is one thing. Self-inflicting of suffering, I being the sole existence, is quite another. This is an important sentence. Cruelty to others, I remaining immune or even participating in their sufferings by subsequent repentance or belated pity, is one thing. This is the cosmic God, cosmic personal God, extra cosmic personal God. In my opinion, the Abrahamic God. And the other thing is, self-inflicting or suffering, I being the sole existence, is quite another. Still, the ethical difficulty may be brought back in a modified form. That debate can be, then it can still happen. All delight, all dash delight, he's saying, as a one single phrase. All delight being necessarily all good and all love, how can evil and suffering exist in Satchidananda, since he is not mechanical existence but free and conscious being, free to condemn and reject evil and suffering? We have to recognize that the issue so stated is also a false issue because it applies the terms of a partial statement as if they were applicable to the whole. So the problem is that we are applying the terms of a partial statement as if they were applicable to the whole. For the ideas of good, because the ideas of good and of love which we thus bring into the concept of the all delight spring from a dualistic and divisional conception of things. They are based entirely on the relations between creature and creature. Yet we persist in applying them to a problem which starts, on the contrary, from the assumption of one who is all. We have to see first how the problem appears or how it can be solved in its original purity, on the basis of unity in difference. Only then can we safely deal with its parts and its developments, such as the relations between creature and creature on the basis of division and duality. We have to recognize, if we thus view the whole, not limiting ourselves to the human difficulty and the human standpoint, that we do not live in an ethical world. The attempt of human thought to force an ethical meaning into the whole of nature is one of those acts of willful and obstinate self-confusion, one of those pathetic attempts of the human being to read himself, his limited habitual human self, into all things and judge them from the standpoint he has personally evolved, which most effectively prevent him from arriving at real knowledge and complete sight. He's basically talking about decoloniality in a way. He's reclaiming the conversations around the dharmic ways of talking about God, as opposed to the Western religious way of talking about God. Material nature is not ethical. The law which governs it is a coordination of fixed habits which take no cognizance of good and evil, but only of force that creates, force that arranges and preserves, force that disturbs and destroys impartially, non-ethically, according to the secret will in it, according to the mute satisfaction of that will in its own self-formations and self-dissolutions. Animal or vital nature is also non-ethical, although as it progresses it manifests the crude material out of which the higher animal evolves the ethical impulse. We do not blame the tiger because it slays and devours its prey any more than we blame the storm because it destroys, or the fire because it tortures and kills. Neither does the conscious force in the storm, the fire, or the tiger blame or condemn itself. Blame and condemnation, or rather self-blame and self-condemnation, are the beginning of true ethics. What a great line, what a great line. Self-blame and self-condemnation are the beginnings of true ethics. When we blame others without applying the same law to ourselves, we are not speaking with a true ethical judgment, but only applying the language ethics has evolved for us to an emotional impulse of recoil from or dislike of that which displeases or hurts us. This is about people who are only blaming and complaining about everything else the people are doing, but they never take any of those same steps or the steps they are recommending to other people themselves in their own lives. This recoil or dislike is the primary origin of ethics, but is not itself ethical. The fear of the deer for the tiger, the rage of the strong creature against its assailant is a vital recoil of the individual delight of existence. The fear of the deer for the tiger. It's the vital recoil of the individual delight of existence from that which threatens it. In the progress of the mentality, it refines itself into repugnance, dislike, disapproval. Disapproval of that which threatens and hurts us, approval of that which flatters and satisfies, refined into the conception of good and evil to oneself, to the community, to others than ourselves, to other communities than ours, and finally into the general approval of good, the general disapproval of evil. But throughout, the fundamental nature of the thing remains the same. Man desires self-expression, self-development, in other words, the progressing play in himself of the conscious force of existence. That is his fundamental delight. Whatever hurts that self-expression, self-development, satisfaction of his progressing self, is for him evil. Whatever helps, confirms, raises, aggrandizes, ennobles it is his good. Only his conception of the self-development changes, becomes higher and wider, begins to exceed his limited personality, to embrace others, to embrace all in its scope. In other words, ethics is a stage in evolution. That which is common to all stages is the urge of Satchidananda towards self-expression. This urge is at first non-ethical, then infra-ethical. I need to underline this side. This urge is at first non-ethical, then infra-ethical in the animal, then in the intelligent animal, even anti-ethical, for it permits us to approve hurt done to others which we disapprove when done to ourselves. In this respect, man even now is only half ethical, and just as all below us is infra-ethical, so there may be that above us whither we shall eventually arrive. Above us whither, W-H-I-T-H-E-R. So there may be that above us whither we shall eventually arrive, which is supra-ethical, has no need of ethics. The ethical impulse and attitude, so all-important to humanity, the ethical impulse, is a means by which it struggles out of the lower harmony and universality, based upon inconscience and broken up by life into individual discords, towards a higher harmony and universality, based upon conscient oneness with all existences. Arriving at that goal, this means will no longer be necessary or even possible, since the qualities and oppositions on which it depends will naturally dissolve and disappear in the final reconciliation. If then the ethical standpoint applies only to a temporary though all-important passage from one universality to another, the ethical standpoint, we cannot apply it to the total solution of the problem of the universe, but can only admit it as one element in that solution. To do otherwise is to run into the peril of falsifying all the facts of the universe, all the meaning of the evolution behind and beyond us, in order to suit a temporary outlook and a half-evolved view of the utility of things. A half-evolved view of the utility of things. The world has three layers: infra-ethical, ethical, and supra-ethical. We have to find that which is common to all, for only For only so can we resolve the problem. For only so can we resolve the problem. That which is common to all is, we have seen, the satisfaction of conscious force of existence developing itself into forms and seeking in that development its delight. From that satisfaction or delight of self-existence, it evidently began, for it is that which is normal to it, to which it clings, which it makes its base, but it seeks new forms of itself, and in the passage to higher forms there intervenes the phenomenon of pain and suffering, which seems to contradict the fundamental nature of its being. This and this alone is the root problem. What is the root problem? Let's read again. From that satisfaction or delight of self-existence, it evidently began. For it is that which is normal to it, to which it clings, which it makes its base, but it seeks new forms of itself, and in the passage to higher forms there intervenes the phenomenon of pain and suffering, which seems to contradict the fundamental nature of its being. This and this alone is the root problem. How shall we solve it? Shall we say that Satchidananda is not the beginning and end of things, but the beginning and end is nihil, an impartial void, itself nothing but containing all potentialities of existence or non-existence, consciousness or non-consciousness, delight or undelight? We may accept this answer if we choose, but although we seek thereby to explain everything, we have really explained nothing, we have only included everything. A nothing which is full of all potentialities is the most complete opposition of terms and things possible, and we have therefore only explained a minor contradiction by a major contradiction, by driving the self-contradiction of things to their maximum. Nihil is the void, where there can be no potentialities. An impartial indeterminate of all potentialities is chaos, and all that we have done is to put chaos into the void without explaining how it got there. All that we have done is to put chaos into the void without explaining how it got there. Let us return then to our original conception of Satchidananda and see whether on that foundation a completer solution is not possible. We must first make it clear to ourselves that just as when we speak of universal consciousness, we mean something different from, more essential and wider than the waking mental consciousness of the human being, so also when we speak of universal delight of existence, we mean something different from, more essential and wider than the ordinary emotional and sensational pleasure of the individual human creature. Pleasure, joy and delight, as man uses the words, are limited and occasional movements which depend on certain habitual causes and emerge, like their opposites, pain and grief, which are equally limited and occasional movements from a background other than themselves. Okay, I read this sentence really badly. I'll read it again. This was a huge sentence. We must first make it clear to ourselves that just as when we speak of universal consciousness, we mean something different from more essential and wider than the waking mental consciousness of the human being, so also when we speak of universal delight of existence, we mean something different from, more essential and wider than the ordinary emotional and sensational pleasure of the individual human creature. Pleasure, joy and delight, as man uses the words, are limited and occasional movements which depend on certain habitual causes and emerge, like their opposites, pain and grief, which are equally limited and occasional movements from a background other than themselves. Delight of being is universal, illimitable and self-existent, not dependent on particular causes, the background of all backgrounds, from which pleasure, pain and other more neutral experiences emerge. When delight of being seeks to realize itself as delight of becoming, it moves in the movement of force, and itself takes different forms of movement, of which pleasure and pain are positive and negative currents. When delight of being seeks to realize itself as delight of becoming, it moves in the movement of force, and itself takes different forms of movement, of which pleasure and pain are positive and negative currents. Subconscient in matter, superconscient beyond mind, This delight seeks in mind and life to realize itself by emergence in the becoming, in the increasing self-consciousness of the movement. Its first phenomena are dual and impure, move between the poles of pleasure and pain, but it aims at its self-revelation in the purity of a supreme delight of being, which is self-existent and independent of objects and causes. Just as Satchidananda moves towards the realization of the universal existence, in the individual and of the form exceeding consciousness in the form of body and mind, so it moves towards the realization of universal, self-existent and objectless delight in the flux of particular experiences and objects. Those objects we now seek as stimulating causes of a transient pleasure and satisfaction, those objects which we now seek, which are free, possessed of self, we shall not seek but shall possess them as reflectors rather than causes of a delight which eternally exists. In the egoistic human being, the mental person emergent out of the dim shell of matter, delight of existence is neutral, semi-latent, still in the shadow of the subconscious, hardly more than a concealed soil of plenty covered by desire with a luxuriant growth of poisonous weeds and hardly less poisonous flowers, the pains and pleasures of our egoistic existence. When the divine conscious force working secretly in us has devoured these growths of desire, when in the image of the Rig Veda the fire of God has burnt up the shoots of earth, that which is concealed at the roots of these pains and pleasures, their cause and secret being, the sap of delight in them, will emerge in new forms not of desire, but of self-existent satisfaction, which will replace mortal pleasure by the immortal's ecstasy. Let's read this sentence again. When the divine conscious force working secretly in us has devoured these growths of desire, when in the image of the Rig Veda the fire of God has burnt up the shoots of earth, that which is concealed at the roots of these pains and pleasures, their cause and secret being, the sap of delight in them, will emerge in new forms not of desire, but of self-existent satisfaction, which will replace mortal pleasure by the immortal's ecstasy. And this transformation is possible because these growths of sensation and emotion are in their essential being, the pains no less than the pleasures. And this transformation is possible because these growths of sensation and emotion are in their essential being, the pains no less than the pleasures, that delight of existence which they seek but fail to reveal, fail because of division, ignorance of self, and egoism.